The dinner table was set, every piece of silverware aligned to perfection. Plates gleamed under the chandelier's soft light, casting delicate reflections on the polished oak surface. There was a kind of tension in the air, an undercurrent that none of the guests seemed to acknowledge. It was a family dinner meant to celebrate milestones, birthdays, anniversaries, achievements. But something darker loomed over the evening. Emily, the 21-year-old stepdaughter, sat quietly at one corner of the table. Her face was composed, almost serene, but beneath her calm exterior was a roiling storm. She had uncovered something days ago, something so horrific it had shaken her to her core, and tonight she had decided was the night to expose it. She had rehearsed the words countless times, imagined their impact, and envisioned the fallout. Yet, now that she was here, with everyone she loved sitting around her, the enormity of her decision felt heavier than ever. Across from her sat her mother, Claire, an elegant woman in her late 40s whose charisma often overshadowed her flaws. She was the kind of woman people gravitated toward, charming, intelligent, and impossibly poised. Her husband, Mark, was seated to her right. Mark, Emily's stepfather, was a man of stature, his presence commanding respect. To the untrained eye, they seemed the perfect couple, a picture of marital bliss. But Emily now knew the truth. The facade they presented to the world was a lie. Dinner began in typical fashion with light conversation and polite laughter. Claire recounted an amusing anecdote from her week, Mark added a few quips, and the younger siblings, twins Nathan and Sophie, giggled between bites of mashed potatoes. Emily remained mostly silent, her appetite non-existent. She pushed her food around her plate, her eyes flitting between her mother and stepfather. How could they act so normal? She wondered. How could they sit there, so composed, knowing what they had done? Her opportunity came when Claire rose to fetch the wine. Emily cleared her throat, drawing everyone's attention. "I have something to say," she announced, her voice steady but cold. The room fell silent. Claire paused mid-step, her hand gripping the back of her chair. Mark leaned forward, his expression a mix of curiosity and apprehension. The twins exchanged confused glances. "What is it, darling?" Claire asked, her voice dripping with concern. But Emily could see the flicker of fear in her mother's eyes. Emily took a deep breath. "It's about you," she said, looking directly at Claire. "And Mark." Her voice was cautious, but Claire saw the truth. "Claire loved you." The tension in the room became palpable. Claire forced a laugh, attempting to diffuse the situation. "Emily, what are you talking about?" Emily didn't waver. "I know about the affair," she said, her words cutting through the air like a blade. The color drained from Claire's face. Mark stiffened, his fork clattering onto his plate. The twins stared wide-eyed, their youthful innocence unable to comprehend the gravity of what was unfolding. "Emily, this is not the time or place for," Claire began, but Emily cut her off. "No, Mom, it's exactly the time and place. You've been lying to us, lying to me, to Nathan and Sophie, to everyone. And I'm done pretending everything is fine." Claire's composure cracked. "You don't understand." "I understand perfectly," Emily snapped. "I found the emails, the texts. I saw the hotel receipts, Mom. Don't you dare try to deny it." Mark buried his face in his hands, muttering something under his breath. Claire looked around the table, searching for an ally, but found none. The twins, too young to grasp the nuances, simply looked terrified. "How could you do this?" Emily demanded, her voice breaking. "How could you betray Dad like this? How could you betray us?" Claire tried to explain, her words tumbling out in a frantic rush. "Emily, it's not what you think. Things between your father and me have been complicated. And Mark, don't you dare blame Dad for this," Emily interrupted. "He loved you. He trusted you, and you threw it all away for..." For him? She shot a venomous glance at Mark, who remained silent, his guilt written all over his face. The room descended into chaos. Claire was crying, Mark was trying and failing to defend himself, and the twins were on the verge of tears. Emily felt a surge of vindication but also a deep, aching sadness. This wasn't how she had wanted things to go. But the truth was out now, and there was no going back. Just as she thought the situation couldn't get any worse, Claire dropped a bombshell of her own. "Emily, there's something you don't know. Something I've been meaning to tell you." "What could possibly justify this?" Emily spat. Claire hesitated, then said the words that shattered Emily's world all over again. "Mark is your biological father." For a moment, time seemed to stand still. The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Emily felt like the ground had been pulled out from under her. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "That's not true. That's not possible." "I'm sorry," Claire said, tears streaming down her face. "I wanted to tell you so many times, but I didn't know how." Emily staggered to her feet, her chair screeching against the floor. "You're lying," she said, her voice trembling. "You're just trying to distract me." "I'm not," Claire insisted. "It's the truth, Emily, I swear." Emily couldn't breathe. She couldn't think. She stumbled out of the dining room, her family's voices calling after her. But she didn't stop. She ran to her room, slammed the door, and collapsed onto her bed, sobbing uncontrollably. The weight of everything, the betrayal, the lies, the revelation, was too much to bear. The days that followed were a blur. Emily avoided her family, retreating into herself as she tried to process everything. She didn't know what to believe, what to feel. Her trust in Claire was shattered, her relationship with Mark irreparably damaged. And the worst part was, she couldn't escape the nagging question. If Mark was her biological father, what did that mean for her identity, for her sense of self? One night, unable to sleep, Emily decided to confront her parents. She demanded answers, demanded the truth, and what she learned only deepened her anguish. Claire and Mark had been involved long before Claire met Emily's stepfather. Emily was the result of a brief, passionate affair, an affair that had been buried in the past, only to resurface now in the most devastating way. The revelation changed everything. Emily couldn't look at Mark without feeling a mix of anger and disgust. She couldn't speak to Claire without feeling betrayed. And the twins, innocent bystanders in all of this, had become collateral damage. As weeks turned into months, the family tried to pick up the pieces. Therapy sessions were held, apologies were made, and attempts at reconciliation were undertaken. But the scars ran deep, and the path to healing was long and uncertain. For Emily, the journey was especially difficult. She struggled to forgive, to move on, to find a sense of normalcy in the wake of everything that had happened. But she was determined to rebuild her life, to reclaim her sense of self, and to create a future that wasn't defined by the mistakes of her parents. The dinner that had started as a celebration became a turning point, a night that exposed secrets, shattered illusions, and set the stage for a painful but necessary reckoning. And though the road ahead was fraught with challenges, Emily knew she had the strength to face them, because in the end, the truth, no matter how painful, was better than living a lie. As the weeks turned into months, Emily found herself grappling with an identity crisis that seemed to grow heavier with time. Every memory she had, every moment she had cherished as a family, now felt tainted by the knowledge of what had been hidden. She often found herself staring at old photographs, ones where she smiled next to Mark and Claire, oblivious to the truth that lingered in the shadows of those moments. The man she had thought of as her stepfather was her real father, yet he had failed her in more ways than she could count. Claire and Mark tried, in their own flawed ways, to reach out to Emily. Claire would knock softly on her door, her voice trembling as she asked if they could talk. Mark would leave notes under her door, short, apologetic scribbles that felt more like a child's attempt to placate an angry parent than a genuine attempt to repair their bond. But Emily couldn't bring herself to respond. How could she forgive two people who had upended her entire world? Meanwhile, the twins Nathan and Sophie were caught in the crossfire. They were too young to fully understand the intricacies of what had happened, but they could feel the tension that hung over the house like a storm cloud. Nathan would often ask Emily why she didn't join them for dinner anymore, his big, innocent eyes filled with confusion. Sophie, ever the sensitive one, would crawl into Emily's bed at night, hugging her tightly without saying a word. Their presence was a small comfort in a sea of chaos, but it also reminded Emily of the innocence that had been lost. Not just hers, but theirs as well. One particularly cold evening, as the first snow of the season began to fall, Claire decided to make a bold move. She invited Emily to join her for coffee at a nearby cafe, a neutral ground where they could talk without the suffocating weight of home. To Emily's surprise, she agreed, if only because she wanted answers. The cafe was warm and inviting, a stark contrast to the icy streets outside. Claire had arrived early and chosen a corner table, her hands wrapped around a steaming cup of tea. Emily sat down across from her, her expression guarded. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Claire broke the silence. "I know I've hurt you," she began, her voice heavy with emotion. "And I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. But I need you to understand that everything I did, every choice I made because I thought it was best for you." Emily's lips curled into a bitter smile. "Best for me?" she echoed. "Lying to me my entire life was what you thought was best for me?" Claire flinched, but didn't look away. "I was scared," she admitted. "I was young and stupid, and when I found out I was pregnant with you, I didn't know what to do. Mark and I weren't ready to be parents, and then your stepfather, came into my life. He was kind, stable, everything Mark wasn't at the time. He wanted to give us a fresh start." Emily's heart twisted at the mention of her late stepfather. He had been her rock, the one constant in her life, and now even his memory felt tainted by Claire's lies. "I loved him like a father," Emily said, her voice cracking. "He raised me, and you let me believe he was my dad. Do you have any idea how much it hurts to find out that was a lie?" Tears streamed down Claire's face. "I know," she whispered, "and I'll carry that guilt for the rest of my life. But I need you to know that he loved you, Emily. He knew the truth, and he chose to raise you as his own because he adored you." Emily's defenses began to crumble. She wanted to stay angry, to hold on to her resentment, but Claire's words struck a chord deep within her. "And Mark?" she asked. "What about him? Why did he come back into your life? Why did you let this happen?" Claire hesitated, her hands trembling around her cup. "Mark and we never stopped caring for each other," she admitted. "But I never intended for things to go this far. It was a mistake, one I regret more than anything. But you have to understand, Emily, love is complicated. Life is complicated." Emily stared at her mother, searching for any sign of the woman she had once looked up to. The apology felt genuine, but the wound was still fresh, the betrayal still raw. "I don't know if I can ever forgive you," she said finally. Claire nodded, her expression somber. "I understand," she said, "and I'll wait as long as it takes." As they left the cafe, Emily walked a few steps ahead of Claire, her mind heavy with conflicting emotions. The icy wind bit at her cheeks, but she barely noticed it. Could she ever move past the betrayal? Could she rebuild her relationship with the people who had hurt her so deeply? She didn't have the answers, but she knew one thing. She couldn't live in the shadows of her parents' mistakes forever. That night, Emily sat in her room, the weight of everything finally pushing her to make a decision. She wrote letters, one to Claire and one to Mark. She poured her heart into them, expressing her anger, her heartbreak, and her confusion, but also her desire to find closure. She left the letters on the kitchen table and packed a bag. When morning came, Claire and Mark found the letters and read them with tearful eyes. Emily had written that she needed time to heal, time to figure out who she was outside of their lies. She wasn't leaving forever, but she couldn't stay in the same house while she felt so broken. She loved them in her own complicated way, but forgiveness would take time. Emily moved to a small apartment in the city, focusing on her studies and rebuilding her life on her terms. She sought therapy, where she learned to process her emotions and confront the pain of her past. Slowly but surely, she began to find peace. Months later, she agreed to meet Claire and Mark again. It was a tentative step toward reconciliation, but it was also a step forward. The dinner was quiet, awkward at times, but there was an underlying hope that hadn't been there before. In time, Emily learned to forgive, not because they deserved it, but because she deserved the freedom that came with letting go of the pain. Her relationship with Claire and Mark would never be the same, but it didn't have to be. It was enough that they were trying, that they were willing to own their mistakes and work toward a better future. The twins, who had been caught in the crossfire, grew closer to Emily as the family healed. They became a source of joy in her life, reminding her that even in the darkest times, there was light to be found. Years later, as Emily sat at her own dining table with her own family, she reflected on the journey that had brought her there. Life hadn't been easy, but it had shaped her into someone strong, resilient, and capable of love despite the pain. The betrayal that once defined her life had become a chapter in her story, not the whole book. And in the end, Emily realized that was the most important lesson of all. The past could hurt, but it didn't have to define her future.